Howdy everybody, Dr. Andy Woods here. Today is September the 6th. This is Pastor's Point of View number 318, and as you can see from our preview slide here, we have a prophecy update for you today, and in this particular session we're going to cover some information about the temple, a little bit more on the Gog Magog alignment, the world against Israel, and anti-Semitism. And then we're going to, Lord willing, cover global tyranny, persecution, and global religion in our next session together. But let's go ahead and start off with the temple in this prophecy update. Of course, prophetically speaking, rumblings about rebuilding the Jewish temple are very significant prophetically. And just by way of review, you might remember Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, which sort of gives an outline of the tribulation period. It says, "He," that's Antichrist, "will make a firm covenant with the many," that's Israel, "for 1 week," that's a 7-year time period. But in the middle of the week, he, Antichrist, will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. That latter phrase is describing what's going to happen to the Antichrist at the end of the 7-year time period. But right there in the middle, it says, "But in the middle of the week, he will engage in something called the abomination of desolation." We have a picture of it, as you can see on your screen there, kind of an overview of Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 in the tribulation period. In other words, right in the middle of the tribulation period, the Antichrist will walk into the rebuilt Jewish temple and desecrate it. He'll put an end to the sacrifices being offered in that temple. He'll set up an image of himself in that temple, and he will deify himself. Now, obviously, a prophecy like that can't materialize unless you have a rebuilt temple. And what we're speaking of here is temple number 3. Here's sort of a list of Israel's 4 temples, 2 past, 2 future. And ever since the second temple was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70, for roughly 2,000 years, the nation of Israel has not had a third temple. But it's so interesting to see rumblings within the nation of Israel about the rebuilding of temple number 3. And we believe that that is a key stage-setting sign how close we are to this 7-year tribulation period. I mean, you can't have the 7-year tribulation period really without that temple, particularly the midpoint. And the fact that people are even talking about temple number 3 is exciting, because it shows you how close we're getting to this 7-year tribulation period and how close we're getting to the rapture. Because the rapture, as we have taught, precedes this 7-year tribulation period. I've heard people put it this way: when the discussion of the world moves to Israel, you're dealing with God's hour hand. When the discussion of the world moves to Jerusalem, the city, you're dealing with God's minute hand. And when the discussion of the world now begins to focus on the temple and the Temple Mount, we're dealing with the second hand. So anything in the news related to rumblings concerning temple number 3, we are very happy to bring that to your attention in prophecy updates here on Pastor's Point of View. So with all of that being said, I just want to briefly draw your attention to this recent Jerusalem Post article, August the 27th, 2024. The title of it is KAN, a news organization, reports Israel will finance tours to Temple Mount. And although the NASC has denied these reports are percolating nonetheless. Just a little bit from this article. It says here, Israel will finance guided tours of the Temple Mount for the first time ever to, quote, strengthen and stabilize the old city. KAN News reported on Monday. According to the report, 2 million shekels will be allocated to the project from the budget of the office of the Heritage Minister, whose last name is Eliyahu. The tours will allow many visitors to receive an accurate version of history, Eliyahu said. So there we have it. Let's jump to our second category here, and this has to do with the famous Gog Magog invasion spoken of by the prophet Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, Ezekiel 2,600 years ago predicted a conglomeration of nations coming from the remote north, spearheaded by Russia, Turkey, and Iran, would, as part of the end time scenario, invade the nation of Israel in the last days. And if you're looking for some evidence as to why we think Russia, Turkey, and Iran are the principal players in this invasion, I recommend the book that I wrote a few years back called The Middle East Meltdown. That will give you documentation for that. But notice our map here where we have Rosh, or Russia, circled as one of the invaders. And that's very interesting in light of this headline here from AA.com, August 28th, 2024. It says, Russia condemns Israeli minister's actions and calls for a synagogue to be built in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, remember, we've reported on in the previous article that we read concerning the temple makes reference to this. Foreign ministry spokesman Ben-Gvir has sort of asserted that Israelis need to assert more of their own rights on the Temple Mount, which is currently controlled by Jordan. And we brought that to your attention because we thought that was very interesting, because it shows rumblings within Israel concerning a desire and ambition to rebuild Temple number 3. Well, apparently Russia has gotten aware of this and has told the Israelis and Ben-Gvir to knock it off, which I believe is heightening tensions between Russia and the land of Israel, exactly like Ezekiel predicted would manifest itself in the end times. So with all of that being said, a little bit from the article. It says, Russia on Wednesday criticized Israeli National Security Minister Ben-Gvir's recent actions and statements regarding the Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem, calling them provocative. Responding to an Anadolu question during a press conference in Moscow about Ben-Gvir's call to build a synagogue inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in East Jerusalem, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, she described the minister's behavior as irresponsible and dangerous in nature of the conditions when relations between Muslims and Jews in Israel and Palestine are already strained to the limit. The unequivocally negative reaction to this initiative, both in the region and globally, speaks for itself, said the spokeswoman, emphasizing the minister's behavior not only disrespects Muslims, including Israeli citizens, but also grossly violates the status quo of Jerusalem's holy site as established by international law. The Russian spokeswoman went on and she said, we regret to note that such statements by adherents of religious Zionism, as well as actions like the recent repeated attempts by Ben-Gvir and his supporters to conduct Jewish rituals inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, deserve condemnation because they are provocative. Close quotes. This is very interesting. Here is Ben-Gvir saying, hey, we as Israelis have prayer rights on the Temple Mount. And he's even gone so far as to say, you know what, we need a synagogue built within this Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it's showing this strand within Israeli thinking of this ambition to reassert rites, which I think will ultimately lead to the construction of temple number 3, which has to be built according to Bible prophecy. And not only does it put in play the prophecies related to temple number 3, but it puts into play the prophecies related to Russian animosity, because Russia will be one of the principal players that will come against Israel in the end times. Russia has this stake in this so-called two-state solution, which we'll be describing a little bit later. And they're afraid that Ben-Gvir's statements are going to sort of upset the apple cart. So most people would sort of gloss over a headline like this, but it brings together two powerful prophetic themes. Number one, the ambition for temple number 3, and number 2, further tension between Russia and Israel, which, as I said before, is very significant because Russia is one of the principal players, if not the key player, in eventually the invasion of Israel, as prophesied by the prophet Ezekiel in Ezekiel 38 and 39, 2,600 years ago. Let's continue a little bit more with this Gog Magog alignment. You notice our map here. We have Russia circled, and then we have Turkey circled as well. Those are the two principal players, along with Iran, in this upcoming invasion. So what would make sense is if Russia and Turkey would start cooperating with each other before this invasion takes place, as sort of something that's setting the table, setting the stage, if you will, for this coming invasion. I mean, what's interesting in this Gog-Magog alignment is not just these nations with hostility coming into existence against the reborn state of Israel, but the cooperation between those nations. So if Turkey and Russia are two of the invaders, any headline related to cooperation between Turkey and Russia would be prophetically significant. So that's why this particular news article here from intelnews.com, August 27th, 2024 is so significant. It says reports suggest Turkey to warehouse Russian S-400 missiles in order to obtain F-35 jets from the U.S., according to Intel News. Notice what it says here. Turkish media are reporting on local speculation that Turkey is working on a formula that would see Ankara sideline its acquired Russia S-400 missiles in order to persuade the U.S. to lift its ban on the country acquiring F-35 planes. One spokesman on August 27th reported that the word in Turkey's lobbies is that Ankara has suggested to Washington that the S-400 missile defense systems purchased from the Kremlin 5 years ago could be placed in secure storage, with the U.S. given the right to monitor their status on an ongoing basis. Very interesting, because the Kremlin and Turkey in cahoots together regarding acquired missiles. And then you learn that, we're going to kind of put that on hold for a while because we want something more from the United States. What do they want from the United States? It talks here about F-35 jets from the United States. So we'll kind of put that on hold, our deal with the Kremlin, put those in storage. I mean, we already have the missiles. The United States come in here and monitor that if you want. But really what we're interested in is something that the United States is going to give us, F-35 jets. So what do you have here? You have Russia and Turkey coming together, like Ezekiel predicted. And very sadly, as we'll talk about in a moment, all the nations will turn against Israel in the last days. And here you have the United States wanting to give Turkey these F-35 jets. So you've got Turkey, you've got Russia, and very, very sadly, my own country, the United States, is getting involved in this as well. We might ask ourselves the question, why is the United States giving jets to Turkey in the first place? I mean, why are we constantly arming Israel's enemies? And you have to understand that the United States government, as I speak, yes, is helping Israel on a limited basis, but we're also heavily, actively involved in arming Israel's enemies. As an American, that disturbs me a great deal because of what Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3 says. Remember what God spoke to the patriarch Abram as the nation of Israel was just getting off the ground. God said in Genesis 12 verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all families of the earth will be blessed. I'm not really interested in a government that represents me that is helping Israel in a limited way with one hand, but with the other hand is arming Israel's enemies. I think that pushes us into the cursing side of Genesis 12 verse 3, which to me does not bode well for our country, and yet that's the kind of thing that's going on right now. The United States is arming Israel's enemies, and it's putting into play agreements that Turkey has already made with Russia. And these are all very significant news articles because they are tying together this conglomeration, if you will, of nations that will come against Israel in the end times. Notice our map again here, and here we have Turkey and Persia or Iran circled. And we have Russia as one of the invaders, Turkey as one of the invaders, Persia or Iran, I may have spoken earlier, Persia is Iran, Rosh is Russia, and then Turkey is one of the invaders. And so if all of that is true, wouldn't it stand to reason that Turkey and Iran, as two of the invaders, would start to cooperate with each other? Much like Russia and Turkey are cooperating with each other. And of course, that's exactly what we see happening. Notice this particular caption, if you will, from the Tehran Times. And it says here that Iran and Turkey envoys meet in Baghdad to address regional issues. So right on cue, just like Ezekiel said, you have Turkey, and then you also have Persia or Iran cooperating with each other. Now, this cooperation between the two is very, very interesting, and it's very, very significant because where are they meeting? Well, they're meeting in Baghdad. Where exactly is Baghdad? Well, Baghdad is in modern-day Iraq. Baghdad is very close to another biblically significant city called Babylon, Revelation 17 and 18. We've gone into a lot of detail on prior prophecy updates concerning why we think Babylon in the Bible means Babylon. The city of Babylon is destined prophetically to enjoy resurgence in the end times. And of course, Babylon is 58 miles north, if you will, of Baghdad. Let me see if I've got that right. 50 miles south from Babylon, rather, is Baghdad. Baghdad is 58 miles south of Babylon. So that puts into play three significant things as Russia and Turkey are meeting near Babylon. It puts into play the alliance, if you will, between Turkey and Iran in the last days, and it potentially puts into play Babylon as well, because Babylon is very near Baghdad, where these two regional powers are meeting. So this is the kind of thing that you see constantly transpiring in the news. The very principal powers that Ezekiel and other places of the Bible predict for the end times are constantly in the headlines. They're cooperating with each other, these regional powers, and they're actually meeting in strategic locations that are destined to play a dominant role in the end times. And the Holy Spirit, I believe, is giving us all of these signs, indicating how close we are to the end time scenario and the coming events of the Great Tribulation period. Before we leave the subject of Gog Magog, let me draw your attention to Saudi Arabia. Here's a map here, and it's got the players that will invade Israel in the end times all mentioned with an arrow from their respective locations into the land of Israel. You notice there we have Saudi Arabia circled. Saudi Arabia does not have an arrow going from Saudi Arabia into the land of Israel. Well, why don't we have that arrow there? Because Saudi Arabia is not one of the invaders. Bible prophecy indicates that Saudi Arabia is one of the objectors to this invasion. Ezekiel saw this 2,600 years ago, and the key verse would be Ezekiel 38, verse 13. It says this: when this invasion is executed, it says Sheba and Dedan. Now, Sheba and Dedan is Saudi Arabia. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all its villages will say to you, the invaders, have you come to capture spoil? Have you assembled your company to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to capture great spoil? So as this invasion is transpiring, Sheba and Dedan don't like it, and they stage what many call a lame protest. They articulate their disapproval, Saudi Arabia does, of this invasion, and at the same time they don't do anything to stop it. Now, for a long time, Bible prophecy teachers have sort of puzzled over why Saudi Arabia, of all people, would do this. Well, now we actually have an explanation. It's something called the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords open up normalization or trade agreements between Israel and Islamic countries. If an Islamic country will simply acknowledge Israel's right to exist, then Israel promises in return to open up to these various countries what we call the 4 T's: trade, travel, tourism, and technology. And there have been many different countries, maybe many is not the best word, about 4 or 5, Morocco, Persian Gulf countries, the United Arab Emirates, others in the Persian Gulf area that have sort of acquiesced to these Abraham Accords. Well, the very next one that's supposed to fall under the jurisdiction of the Abraham Accords, the very next nation that everybody anticipates is going to fall under the auspices of the Abraham Accords, is going to be Saudi Arabia. So now you have an explanation as why the Saudis would oppose the invasion, because they're engaged in a normalization agreement with Israel, and they're benefiting because of Israel. So it stands to reason that the Saudis would speak up when this invasion, spearheaded from Russia, Iran, and Turkey, transpires. So is it true that the Saudis are about to normalize relationships with Israel? In fact, it is true. And it's happening so fast, it could happen before the next American presidential election in November. Notice this article from the timesofisrael.com. Again, a very recent article, August the 28th, 2024. It says the White House insists Israel-Saudi normalization still possible before the U.S. election. The article says this: the White House insists that it's still possible to broker a normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia before the November United States presidential election, and says it's working to complete the initiative even as the Israel-Hamas war wages in Gaza. President Biden absolutely believes normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia is possible, and he believes that it's certainly possible to get it done before the end of his time as president, according to National Security spokesman John Kirby in an interview with the Times of Israel. So as you know from American politics, there has been a coup against Biden. He is no longer the presidential candidate, nominee representing the Democratic Party. That has been given at the convention to Kamala Harris. A lot more on her a little later, particularly in our next show together. So Biden is on the way out, and as part of his legacy, he wants to broker this agreement, play a monumental role in brokering this agreement between the Saudis and the nation of Israel. And so this Saudi normalization with Israel is on the fast track. And it could happen within the next month or 2 months. That's how fast it's happening. Biden sees this as part of his legacy. After having been humiliated by his own party executing a coup against him, he wants something meaningful to point to. And this, in his mind, is part of his legacy. And so he's aggressively involved, his administration is aggressively involved in brokering this agreement. Now, your average person reads that and says, interesting information, but it doesn't have any real consequence to them in terms of the times, signs of the times. But if you're a student of Bible prophecy, this means everything to you. Once that agreement is brokered, you now have an explanation as to why the Saudis are going to impose this invasion spearheaded by Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And so the very intricate details and pieces of the puzzle are being put into place by our omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God to make sure the tiny specifics of his word are going to be fulfilled prophetically, just like he said it would happen 2,600 years ago, because God is not a man that he should lie. It's impossible for God to lie. And so every specific detail has to be accomplished, just like he said, right down to the Sheba and Dedan protest. And so the Gog Magog coalition is coming together with tremendous precision and tremendous accuracy. Let's jump to our third major category, and this has to do with the world against Israel. As a biblical entry point, we like to use Zechariah 12, verse 3, which says it will come about in that day that I, that's God, will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. Notice the all. And we have a parallel passage just a chapter or two later in Zechariah's writings, and this is 2,500 years ago, writing just after the time of Ezekiel and Daniel. Zechariah, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, in Zechariah 14, 2 and 3, predicted, "For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city will be exiled, but the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle." Israel is being pushed to a point where she's not going to have a friend in the world other than God. And what pushes her to that brink is every nation on planet Earth will turn against the nation of Israel. And that's why I like to highlight the alls in Zechariah's prophecy. All means all. It includes Russia, Turkey, and Iran, which we spoke of a little earlier. It includes the city of Babylon in modern-day Iraq, which we spoke of a little bit earlier. It includes, although not referenced directly in Bible prophecy, the United States of America, as we spoke of a little earlier, playing a role in arming Turkey and many of Israel's adversaries. And it includes every single nation. As I'll show you in a minute, it includes the nation of Japan. And the name of the game here is the two-state solution. Notice our map. The whole name of the game is that lighter blue area, flippantly called the West Bank, where they want to remove that from Jewish control. Remember, Israel won that in a war of self-defense in 1967 and relinquish that to the international community or the Palestinians, the so-called Palestinian state. Here's another map that we prefer because it has better terminology. They want Israel to relinquish that lighter brown area, Judea and Samaria. Obviously, that will mean a disaster for Israel, in our opinion, because the Israelis already tried this in 2004 by relinquishing that darker brown area called Gaza. After that was relinquished in 2004, they had there in Gaza one and only one election, I should say. They elected Hamas, and that has become a beachhead for terrorist activity into Israel ever since. The latest incursion would be the massacre of the Israelis, many Israelis, that took place August the 7th of 2023. So if the two-state solution didn't work with Gaza, why would anybody in their right mind think that the two-state solution is going to work with an even larger area called the West Bank or Judea and Samaria? And yet the world community is hell-bent. And I chose those words very carefully because that's what it is. They are absolutely hell-bent in their drunken stupor in imposing this two-state solution. Israel, you're going to have this two-state solution whether you want it or not. And it's going to take Israel's width and reduce it to less than 10 miles, as you can see, putting Israel in a position where she is indefensible. And ever since the events of October the 7th, the clarion call of the nations of the earth is two-state solution. In fact, here is something that comes from the Palestine Project. This is a map of all of the countries that now are demanding this two-state solution. The caption at the bottom says, as of May 22nd, 2024, the state of Palestine is recognized by 146 countries around the world. In other words, what happened on October the 7th of last year has not slowed down this demand for a two-state solution. It's accelerated it dramatically. Where nation after nation after nation is demanding this two-state solution, which ultimately is going to be injurious to Israel. As some have said, the two-state solution is nothing but a prerequisite for the final solution because it will allow a terrorist zone ultimately within the borders of Israel, just like the relinquishment of Gaza did nothing to create peace in the region, but actually gave a permission for a terrorist zone in the southwestern portion of the nation of Israel. And so we think all of this is prophetically significant because it's stage setting, it's a pretext for Zechariah's prophecies that all nations will turn against Israel in the end times. Now, the latest nation to do this is none other than Japan herself. Notice this article from AA.com, again, August 21st, 2024. Recent article, it says, exclusive, Japan to consider recognition of a Palestinian state in a comprehensive manner. The article says Tokyo will consider recognizing an independent state of Palestine in a comprehensive manner Japanese officials told Andulo, pitching Tokyo's unique role to move toward a two-state solution in the Middle East. The diplomatic mission representing the Palestine Liberation Organization, otherwise known as the PLO, government opened in 1977 and is headed by Ambassador Siam, who told Anadolu that Japan is now studying very seriously, and also South Korea in recognizing a Palestinian state. Hey, we're studying the issue, Japan says. And South Korea, according to the article, is jumping on board. What other nations are jumping on board? The article continues. Japan's pitch to play its role in the Middle East comes amid a growing number of Western nations, including Spain and Norway, as well as Ireland, in recognizing Palestine as an independent state. I mean, Zechariah said all nations would be involved in this. Who's involved? Japan, South Korea, Spain, Norway, Ireland, the United States of America, and as we said earlier, an additional 146 countries. I mean, we're literally living in a time period where Zechariah's prophecies of all nations demanding, in essence, they don't sell it like this, but this is what it is, a terrorist zone within an indefensible Israel. All the nations are demanding this and promoting this. All the nations are turning against Israel, which is what Zechariah said would happen at the end of the age. It's stunning to see this roll sort of having this domino effect, snowball effect. The article says, in a path-breaking move, the historic city of Nagasaki, hit by a United States nuclear bomb in World War II, refused to invite Israeli officials to its commemoration event this month. Do you remember the cold greeting? Well, it really wasn't even a greeting. The chilly response given by Biden and Harris when Netanyahu visited our country, what was it, a month or two ago? Now Japan is jumping on board by refusing to invite Israeli officials to its commemoration of what happened to Nagasaki when they commemorate that event this month, when Nagasaki was hit by a nuclear bomb in the World War II era. Israel and your officials not invited. Israeli delegation coming to the United States, very chilly, cold reception involving protests, involving, you might remember, insects being released in the Watergate Hotel, I believe it was, where the Israeli delegation was staying by certain activist groups. A response that was so cold and so chilly, Netanyahu had nowhere to speak except to a joint session of Congress at the invitation of majority of the House of Representatives, majority leader, Speaker of the House, Speaker Johnson, who, by the way, holds on to that position by a very razor-thin, narrow thread. I mean, had he not held on to that position, probably Netanyahu would have been given no reception here in the United States at the governmental level. You have to look at all of these things to see the manifestation of what Zechariah predicted at the end of the age. All of these Western-style nations, in addition to Middle Eastern countries, are turning against Israel, demanding the two-state solution, demanding a terrorist zone within the nation of Israel, reducing Israel to a width of less than 10 miles, which is indefensible. If you had asked me how in the world could Zechariah's prophecies take place 5 years ago, I would have sort of scratched my head. I'm not sure. But now I have no doubt how they're going to take place, because they are taking place. The events of October 7th have not slowed down things. They have instead accelerated things in that regard dramatically. Let's look at one more category here on this particular session. Pastor's point of view dealing with a prophecy update, anti-Semitism. We know from the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verses 6 through 17, that midway through the tribulation period, Satan, who apparently still has access to God's throne room, not to minister and serve as he once did as a high-ranking angel, but he apparently can go into that throne room to accuse and communicate that. We see that in Job chapter 1 and Job chapter 2. Even that privilege midway through the tribulation period as the Antichrist desecrates the third Jewish temple, that privilege will be taken away from Satan. Revelation 12 verses 6 through 17 talks about Satan at that point plummeting to the earth. And the word hate, which is the Greek word orge, is used in that section several times to describe the great emotional hatred that the dragon or the devil has for the woman clothed with the sun and the moon and the 12 stars, which is a clear reference to Israel, factoring in Joseph's dream in Genesis 37, verses 9 and 10. It describes escalating hatred for the Jewish people in general and the Jewish nation in particular in the end time scenario. So one of the things that you can expect to increase as we get closer to the end of the age will be anti-Semitism, which really refers to the irrational hatred of the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The reason that hatred will escalate and really go right off the charts is it's satanically induced. Satan has enough of an understanding of Bible prophecy to know that the kingdom is going to come into the world through Israel at the end of the tribulation period, during which time he'll be bound for 1,000 years. And at the end of which time he will be thrown into the lake of fire. So his defeat is certain once the kingdom comes. And what better way to stop the manifestation of the coming kingdom than to destroy the instrument through which it will come, the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. So that becomes the spiritual understanding, the angelic understanding, the demonic understanding of anti-Semitism historically and its ascendancy at the end of the age. So upticks in anti-Semitism in harmony with all of these other signs that we have been looking at are prophetically significant. So that brings to our attention here this particular article. This one from Just the News, August 29th, 2024. It says, report. New York hate crimes skyrocket, with Jews targeted in the majority of instances. The article says hate crimes have skyrocketed in New York over the past 5 years, according to a new report by State Comptroller Thomas D. Napoli, if I'm pronouncing that right, which revealed nearly half of the incidents reported last year targeted Jewish people. The comptroller said that there were 1,089 reported hate crime instances in 2023, a 69% increase over pre-pandemic levels in 2019, and the highest number since the state began collecting data as required by New York's 2000 Hate Crimes Act. In other words, in New York, post-pandemic, the instances of hate crimes being committed against Jewish people have jumped 69%, which is an astounding figure. Keep in mind that this is taking place in a very blue part of the country. And I'm here to tell you folks that as much as people want to say racism is in the red states, if you really want to look at where racism is and Jew hatred is and anti-Semitism is, look at the left wing of the Democratic Party. the Hezbollah wing of the Democratic Party, as they're sometimes referred to. Look at Ilhan Omar. Look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others in that wing of the party, and that's where you're going to see true Jew hatred manifesting from. It's not the conservatives that are involved in racism and racial incidents, systemic racism. True racism is found in the far left of the Democratic Party, aimed against the nation of Israel in general and Jewish people in particular. This is taking place in Kathy Hochul's New York. Kathy Hochul is the left of the left. New York and New York City is the left of the left. And that's where these incidents of hatred against Jewish people are coming from. The article goes on and it says in 2023, 44% of all hate crime incidents and 88% of religious-based hate crimes targeted Jewish victims, the largest share of all such crimes. The article goes on and it says the data shows the uptick in violence and intimidation against Jewish and Arab Americans has coincided with Middle East conflicts and comes in the wake of an increase in hate crimes nationally in recent years. So is this going up nationally, these hate crimes? Yes, but it's really going up exponentially in the state of New York. And notice the article brings out here that this is getting worse since the events of October the 7th. I mean, October the 7th really accelerated things prophetically as far as I can tell. Not only did it unite the world against Israel, as we explained earlier, but it also played a catalyst in the propaganda that we receive constantly from the mainstream media that somehow the Jewish people over there, by rooting out terrorism within Gaza, are somehow involved in genocide, which is not true. And that propaganda in turn has accelerated this anti-Semitic fever in the United States, and particularly the bluish areas of the United States of America. All of that being said, we're living in prophetically messianic, significant times when you factor in all of these things coming together in harmony, in concurrence, in concert. One other quick article I'd love to bring to your attention on this subject of anti-Semitism. This comes from an August 31st, 2024 New York Post article, and this is what it says. Upstate New York, notice where this is happening again, New York, imam encourages Columbia students to take out. Now, if someone uses the word take out, what are they talking about? They're talking about murder. They're talking about assassination. Upstate New York imam encourages Columbia students, university students, to take out a professor. Well, why would you, as an imam, encourage the taking out of a professor? Because this particular professor happens to be pro-Israel. So the imam is encouraging the students to take him out. So here's what the article says. It says, an upstate imam urged student activists to take out an outspoken pro-Israel Columbia professor who's returning to the embattled Ivy League this fall after a year of anti-Semitic hate. Vassar-educated, Utica-based Tom, I think it's pronounced Fashin, made the plea about business school professor, and his last name, this pro-Israel professor, is David Dye, during an August 29th webinar entitled Islamic Political Activism with various Columbia student groups, which promoted and broadcast it. Now notice that this imam that's calling for this was educated at Vassar. Very important to understand, because a lot of people out there say, boy, it's really poverty that causes racism, anti-Semitism, terrorism. Not so. Here you have someone that's from an elite school, espousing basically terrorist ideas, terrorist doctrines. Don't think that poverty or lack of education is the cause of terrorism. I mean, I'm not saying that it can have no role, but terrorism is much more complicated than that. The richest, the wealthiest, like Osama bin Laden, for example, came from a wealthy home, an influential family, can get involved in terrorism. Terrorism is when the sin nature, which is violent anyway, Mark 7 verses 20 through 23 says that. Jesus says murder proceeds out of the hearts of people. James chapter 4 verses 1 through 3 talks about it. Terrorism takes place when the sin nature comes in contact with a hateful ideology like Islam or Marxism, giving the sin nature permission for murder, which is what it already wants to do. See, as a Christian, a true Christian, you really can't be a terrorist because the Bible says, do not let the sun go down on your anger, forgive, turn the other cheek. Christianity is always telling the sin nature to do things that go against the sin nature. But what happens when that same sin nature comes in contact with an ideology which says slay the pagan wherever you find them? Then you have the fertile soil necessary for the tree of terrorism, the fruit of terrorism to sprout up. This is what's happening with this Vassar-educated imam who's essentially calling for taking out a pro-Israel Zionist professor. It talks here about this webinar that he recently conducted. Quote, this is what he said on this webinar. That David I guy, the Zionist professor, how do we get him into trouble? How do we create a situation in which he is in jeopardy? Fashin, 35 years old, asked. The quote continues, here's the key quote, if you're able to take out somebody like that and make an example, that might shut up 100 more, close quote. We got to take that professor out because the 100 other Zionist professors, pro-Israel professors, will keep their mouths shut. The article goes on and it says the New Jersey-born Fashin left Christianity, watch this, to become an atheist, found Karl Marx. Why would he find Karl Marx? Because Karl Marx dedicated his volume Das Kapital to Charles Darwin. Darwin explained creation without God. Marx took his political philosophy and built on that. So if you don't have atheism, you don't have Marxism. And so this particular individual went from apparently Christianity. I don't know what version of Christianity it is, but he went from Christianity to atheism, from atheism to Marxism, from Marxism to Islam. The Jersey-born Fashin left Christianity, become an atheist, found Marx in college, and converted to Islam in 2010. David I alerted Columbia honchos about the imam's screed at the university. And the university launched a probe using outside security experts who concluded that the imam's rhetoric, quote, did not create conditions that require enhanced security measures. Close quote, according to an email from VP of Public Safety Gerald Lewis to David I and shared with the New York Post. So not only is this imam calling for the destruction of this professor, but now you have the security at Columbia University not willing to lift a finger to protect this guy because apparently what the imam said did not create conditions that require enhanced security measures. I mean, is this the type of security that was supposedly protecting Trump from assassination a month or so ago? I mean, where's the security measures for Trump? Where's the security measures at Columbia University for this particular pro-Israel professor? The article says David I gained notoriety last October for his viral video blasting the school for failing to protect Jewish students against terror-supporting mobs and vowing that he would never send his daughter to Columbia. Now, why would you send your daughter to Columbia if it's an unsafe place for Jewish students? The article says 3 days after the Hamas massacre on October 7th that left more than 1,200 dead and 250 kidnapped, Fashin, that's the imam, gushed that he supports the Palestinian resistance 100%, no ifs, ands, or buts, adding that there are, quote, no equivocations, no apologies, no condemnations, close quote. That's what this imam said about the massacre of many within the nation of Israel, the equivalent of our 9/11, if not worse. What did he say to that? No equivocations, no apologies, no condemnations, close quote. You won't even condemn what Hamas just did, beginning with the events on October the 7th. And then you turn around and you host a webinar where you're calling for a pro-Israel professor at a Ivy League institution to be taken out, because if he's taken out, it'll shut up 100 other professors that might dare voice pro-Israel, pro-Zionist concerns. Any rebuke of the murder, rapes, dismemberment, and decapitations are akin to criticizing the table manners of a starving person, he said. So what the Israelis are doing in rooting out terrorism in Gaza is the moral equivalent in his mind of what Hamas did to Israel coming from Gaza on October the 7th. Let me tell you something, folks. If this guy, this imam, had said this about any other ethnic group, Hispanic, Asian, black, whoever, he would be, and rightfully so, soundly and roundly condemned. But here's a guy that can just say all of this hateful rhetoric against the Jewish people. Nobody cares. Columbia University has no intention of beefing up security to help this pro-Israel professor. And so how do we understand these things? It's a sign of the time period that we're living in. It's a blatant double standard. It's abominable. It's monstrous. It's disgusting. And yet the Bible says these kinds of things would flicker into full flame as we got closer to the end of the age, commensurate with some of the other signs that we've talked about in this update, such as the temple, Gog Magog, the world against Israel, and anti-Semitism. We're going to pick it up with global tyranny, got a lot to say there, persecution, and global religion in our next update together. For the time being, I want to call your attention by way of infomercials to the Sugarland Bible Church Prophecy Conference of 2025 coming up February 21st, which is a banquet at nearby Sugar Creek Country Club, followed by the all-day conference Saturday, February the 22nd, going from morning till evening, finishing up with a Q&A session in the evening. And then bleeding also, although this isn't formally part of the conference, bleeding also into our normal Sunday activities here at Sugarland Bible Church, where our presenters are going to be presenting that particular Sunday morning at our regular services here at Sugarland Bible Church. It's a faith to final days type of conference, looking at the end of the age, the prophecies concerning the end of the age, and how all of that helps us to build a comprehensive worldview to help us take a great stand as individual Christians for the unique time period that we're living in. Guests and presenters will be Olivier Melnick, Bill Federer, Dr. Randall Price, and myself. Cutting-edge information on the Middle East, cutting-edge information on Bible prophecy, cutting-edge information on the latest outbursts and outrages in the area of anti-Semitism, and then how do we live in the midst of it, from faith to final days. There is registration for the banquet on Friday the 21st and for the all-day conference on the 22nd. Go to the Sugarland Bible Church homepage to sign up for this conference, and we're already starting to fill up, so you want to get your registration secure. Sugarland is a great time to visit that time of the year. Love to have you come out and be part of our conference, and then our church service on Sunday, where we're taking our stand for the things that God says are important, His value system, the value system that we should have concerning the end of the age. And then one other quick conference I'll mention to you before we close off. There's a biblical citizenship conference coming up in Tacoma, Washington. You'll see there the phone number in the church in Tacoma, Washington, where this is going to be held. This is going to be September the 20th through the 22nd. Wonderful biblical citizenship conference, very pertinent conference in light of the upcoming election. Paul Miles, Jeremy Thomas, Dane Rogers, the host pastor, myself, are going to be presenting on subjects related to biblical citizenship. There's an actual QR code on the screen where you can get information on that upcoming prophecy conference, and that conference is coming up just in a few weeks, so I wanted to bring it to your attention. All right, so we will pick it up right here in our next pastor's point of view together. Thank you for listening and watching. God bless you. We'll see you then.